Conversations That Matter is a partner program for the Centre for Dialogue at Simon Fraser University. The production of this program is made possible thanks to the support of the following and viewers like you.
Christine Sommers, welcome.
Thank you very much for having me.
You know, we live on a fault line and people think, oh yeah, that's it, the big disaster, that's what I need to prepare for.
Yeah.
And even knowing all of that, I think that levels of emergency preparedness are low.
Fair.
But are we wrong in our thinking to think that, well, that's what we should be preparing for? Because is life not filled with all sorts of potential emergencies?
Absolutely. It's one of those things where nobody likes to think about emergencies, but they do happen. And a lot of emergency preparedness groups actually say if you prepare for the big one, you actually will be prepared for anything. And that could be, you know, flooding in your home right through to extreme weather or the forest fires that we experienced here last year.
But is there not a challenge, though, if you think, well, okay, I should prepare for the big one, that there are people who will go, what's the point? It's so big, like what can I do? And so then they do nothing.
Yes.
When in fact we'd be better off sort of preparing at different sort of levels of preparedness.
I think that, you know, if you actually go online, there's some fantastic resources actually available from the BC government as well as other groups, federal, down in the States with FEMA as well. And they actually take a sort of tiered approach. So for a lot of people, they do feel overwhelmed when they look at sort of the list and what they should do. And so they try and sort of break it up. And to your point, you could prepare for sort of that individual impact, like something happens to your home, or you could prepare for something that could impact just your community, and then obviously the big one. The idea of don't prepare at all because, you know, what's the point?
I'm going to die anyway.
Yeah, it's, you know, I mean, we've actually, for our company, we researched right back through to Katrina, Superstorm Sandy, what happened in, we were actually motivated to build our company because of the earthquake tsunami that happened in Japan. And when you look at it, absolutely there is always a certain amount of devastation, but you do want to be prepared because you want to be able to be put in the best position that you can be to survive. And if you do survive, that you have the supplies that you need, because at the end of the day, you really should be looking at least 3 days of preparedness for you and your family.
Okay, but I live a complex life. How on earth do I prepare for all the different potential places that I can be when a disaster strikes? Because disaster doesn't strike on schedule.
Yeah, so I mean, you should have something at home, you should have something in your car. It doesn't take a lot to have basics, so, you know, water, some food source. But I think the number one thing that we're seeing is missing is really the connectivity. So making sure that you and your loved ones have a plan, whether that be a so-called muster station that you go to and you find one another, or that you have an out-of-area contact that you could call. When we saw what happened in Calgary with the flooding, there was a lot of people that were actually impacted in the flood who were getting the least amount of information. So to be able to contact somebody outside of the area in Vancouver or Toronto or wherever, they can actually feed you and your family information and give you information on, hey, you know, Uncle Joe is over in this neighborhood, you need to get to him, or just be able to give you news and connectivity to your family that you might not have.
Okay, I know in theory that sounds like it's the perfect thing to do.
Yes.
And I go, yeah, well, I've got a mobile device. I should be able to get in touch with them somehow. But what happens if in the area that I'm in, I have no connectivity?
Yeah.
Then how do I make that contact?
So that's actually one of the impetus for why we built our company. The number one thing to go down always is actually landline phones. So whether the lines are flooded with everybody jumping on and trying to make calls, or sometimes they're actually shut down for 911 dedicated services. So landline is something
You
that...
mean they'll actually restrict access to the landline?
Yeah. Yeah, they need to make sure that emergency services can get communications through, whether it be 911 dedicated calls or that fire, hospitals, things like that are able to get their calls through. So that does happen a lot. So landline always goes down first. Cell will be flooded very quickly soon after. Text can get a little bit sporadic. Email is actually the number one way to communicate. Internet was built to withstand World War III, so that's part of the plan. So if you make sure that you know, whether it be your family, your friends, whoever you want to connect with, that you will try landline, and if that doesn't work, you will go to cell, and if that doesn't work, you'll go to email. A lot of people don't realize that. A good friend of ours who went through the earthquake and tsunami in Japan, it took her 24 hours to realize she could get a message through to her family over email because she was trying through cell, she was trying through text, and it was failing. And eventually she realized, hey, wait a second, I can get them through email. So even just those simple things of talking to one another and creating those kinds of plans makes a huge difference. We saw that Superstorm Sandy in New York in particular, you would see people huddling together around a power source, whether they were charging their cell phone so that they could get data and be able to use the internet through that, or huddling around people's computers so that they could use it for emailing or news. So it is something that is probably one of the most reliable, but yeah, there's absolutely the case if we do have the big one, which we hope we don't, knock on wood, in Vancouver or BC or the whole California coast, it's entirely possible that we'll be without communications. But again, if you talk to your family in advance and you have plans on where you'll meet or plans on where you have those different supplies, that makes a huge difference.
I got to get you to hang on for just a second while we take a quick commercial break.
Absolutely.
We'll be right back.
Conversations That Matter is a not-for-profit program made possible thanks to the charitable support of the following and from viewers like you. Please visit conversationsthatmatter.tv and help us to continue to produce this program.
So what are the key components in building your communication network with those who are closest to you so that you know that you're okay and that you can then start to develop a strategy to get together? Or does that strategy have to be developed in advance anyways? Like, how are we physically going to get together? Yeah, I've already got that in place. The communication helps to supplement that.
Absolutely.
But you want to know that, you know, your daughter, your son, your aunt, your uncle, your grandmother are going to be able to get to that safe place.
For sure.
So how do you start to build that plan that's going to work?
Well, you have to really look at where you live. So I am over in North Vancouver, which is connected to where we are today by 2 bridges.
2 bridges. And without them, you're not getting there.
Exactly. They actually have indicated that that is a perfect example of you should give yourself at least 3 days expectation that you won't get back home if you're on the North Shore. They'll start implementing things like sea buses and buses and things to get people back, but the bottom line is that it's entirely possible that those bridges will be impacted, but actual fact is that they need to go in and make sure it's safe. So they'll shut it down whether it looks impacted or not because they need to make sure it's okay. So there will be delays.
Because they don't want a disaster on top of a
Absolutely,
disaster. Yes.
absolutely. So that's the perfect example. If you are there, if you're in Richmond and you're worried about the stability of the land there, if you're in high areas of flooding, you need to look at where you are. And to your point, you could be at work, you could be at home, you could be traveling. There's just certain things that you need to look at where your life kind of takes you and plan around
Okay,
that.
I'm going to put you on the spot right now because we're here in downtown Vancouver, and if this disaster were to happen right now and you couldn't get home for the next 3 days, what are you going to do?
Well, I have built a system that I can use
But what does that system look like so that somebody else can learn from it to say, because you got to have a place to be safe, eat, go to the bathroom, all these things.
Absolutely.
So what does your plan look like?
So the system that my co-founder and I built, ePACT, is really about connecting communities. So we actually start generally with organizations, but it's free for families. So you can go on and basically you build that support network. So in my support network, I have my sister who is in Coquitlam, who I am the emergency contact for, her and her 2 kids.
So worst case scenario, you could walk to Coquitlam.
Well, worst case scenario, I would walk to my friend who's over in Olympic Village if she was okay,
even
because
better.
she's part of my emergency network. So I have quite a substantial number of emergency contacts that are part of my network. I have my parents who are over in North Van who currently have my dog right now and know to take care of her if I'm not there. So we've talked through all of that, and my system has allowed us to actually connect, and you can communicate through the system as well. So it's got the redundancy of communications.
So these people, your sister or your friend in Olympic Village, know that in the event of a disaster and that you happen to be downtown, even if you can't communicate with them, there's a good chance that you're going to show up.
There's the potential, yeah.
So what have you done to help them be prepared if there isn't power, but you still need food, you still need water? Like, have you then, like, what's the next step?
So with our system, we actually have a partnership with a group called FAST who does emergency supplies. So they actually provide our users with discounts on emergency supplies. The very fact that my family and friends are my family and friends, they have been pushed into some emergency preparedness that they probably wouldn't otherwise. Our running joke is that a lot of people will look at, I can buy an emergency kit or I can buy a new outfit or whatever, and a lot of the time that that current want need is what wins out.
Well,
But a lot.
one in the hand is worth two in the bush.
It's so true.
Yeah.
And the thing is, like I said, human nature tends to be, I don't like to think about bad things. So an emergency for a lot of people is bad things. But I think things like, the BC government has very recently assigned a minister, which is the first time ever, to emergency preparedness. That and actually reacting to things like the Auditor General's report on our preparedness across the province.
Which isn't great.
It isn't, no, but they're making great strides in actually addressing it for the first time. We hadn't seen that in past in regards to it's something that is a known issue, but again, it comes down to, and it was interesting. I just, on a personal note, went to New Orleans for the first time and took a tour, and they took us by the levees, and you look at them and they really aren't that substantial. And talking to the tour guide, he kept saying, it comes down to people wanting to invest now for something that may not happen. And I think what we're seeing in BC, and we're actually quite big in the US as well, we're seeing it all along the coast, is people saying, no, we actually need to invest in this now, which is great. Yeah.
So you get to your friend's place, you've got an emergency kit.
Yeah.
What's in that?
Well, so it's quite a long list that should be there. The basics are that you should have enough water for you and whomever is going to be.
Okay, but this is a challenge about water, though. You don't want to leave it sitting stale for too long. So do you not then need to be paying attention to refreshing that supply?
Yeah, there's actually some great companies. Fast would be one of them. There's another one called Braidner, who's local as well, who, when you order supplies, they'll actually put into their system a reminder for you. So they can track that for you as well, which is great. But there are some products now. The biggest issue is the big plastic containers of water. So those are the ones that have the concern about things leaking into them.
Chemical leaching and so on.
So, but you actually can keep that long term. A lot of people actually have huge amounts of water now because you can keep that for washing and basic, needs besides drinking. So you don't have to chuck it, which is great.
That is good.
Yeah. So that actually lasts quite a long time. But you'll find now with a lot of kits that you can buy actually buy, what are they called? Little packs of water. And those last actually a lot longer than the plastic containers, which is good as well.
This is our second break. We'll be back in a moment.
Conversations That Matter is a not-for-profit program made possible thanks to the charitable support of the following and from viewers like you. Please visit conversationsthatmatter.tv and help us to continue to produce this program.
What about food?
Yeah, there's some varying levels of tastiness on these different types of food.
Now for most people, they do have something in their cupboards and something in the fridge.
Yes.
If you're out of power, what's in the fridge may not last for very long.
Exactly.
Probably the first place that you should start eating.
That's actually what they say, that there's a tier to it. So if you are in your home and power goes out, eat the things in your fridge, the things that will go bad the first, then move to the canned foods.
And then to the cardboard
exactly.
stuff.
they're getting way better. Yes, they've got things like tablets that you can take. They've got these big, huge bars of protein, and so they've gotten a lot better than they used to be. But you can get literally a block this big that will last you like a week as an individual.
But if you have a family of 4 or 5 people, that's quite a bit of food that you have to have on hand to get through 3 days.
Yeah, these the fact is that they're they liken them to what astronauts have. So it's very compact, very easy to store, and they do last years. So it's not too bad. But it's true, if you get a family of 5 or 6 or more, then yes, it can be quite an investment of space and making sure it's somewhere that's accessible too.
Because I'm thinking that even after 3 or 4 days, let's say all of a sudden some of those transportation routes start to open up and whatnot, whatever gets into the grocery stores or whatever is going to get snapped up pretty fast.
Yeah, well, for sure. I mean, when we looked at some of the large-scale disasters that have happened in North America and around the world, that is what happens, is that, it hits, and a lot of the people that aren't prepared immediately, make their way to whatever sources they can, and that's why it's so important to do it personally. And
so we're talking about it from the perspective of individuals right at the moment, but do not organizations and community groups play a role in this? Because we're not always at home. We go to work, we go to the community center, we go to the theater, or we're competing in some sporting event. What kind of responsibility do they have to ensure that there are, in particular, opportunities to communicate and get people to where they need to be? And informed.
Yeah, it really depends on the organization type. So If it's something like a sports group, their responsibility is to the safety and well-being of those people while they're in their care. But the vast majority of them actually, it's their mandate to reunite them with their families as quickly as possible. So for them, it is actually does come down to personal preparedness as well, where they need to have processes in place that they can communicate with the families. Let's say if it's a child sports team, to say, hey, you know, there's been an evacuation of the field, or there's been a large-scale disaster, this is where the meeting place is. Whereas in like a community center, a lot of those actually become emergency response centers, so they might be the place that a lot of people are going. It really depends on the organization type and what they've put in place, and it really comes down to their personal sense of, you know, what they've put in place for taking care of their members, but do they have a legal responsibility as well? And it really, really varies across different organizations.
You know, as you're telling me this, I'm reminded of an interview that I saw with Andy Murray's mother, Andy Murray, the tennis player.
Yep.
I don't know if you know this, but when he was a child going to school, there was a mass shooting in his school, and he was there.
Yeah.
And his mother said that she raced to the school along with all these other parents, and they had no way of getting information.
Right.
So how important is it for schools
Yeah.
to be able to, especially in situations where there's been a lockdown or something, for schools to be able to have an independent way of accessing the parents?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting because, you know, with schools, with most of the organizations I listed, that's actually one of the main benefits of our system, is that we're replacing paper forms that they're managing all of this information on. So whether it be the parent's contact details, the nanny, the grandparent, the support person, if the parent is across a bridge somewhere and can't get to the kids. That data right now, a lot of it's being managed on paper, which isn't connected to any kind of communication system.
Right. And what if the person who's in charge of the paper can't get doesn't have access to it?
Yeah, we do have a lot of, you know, carrying around in binders or locked in a filing cabinet situations.
That room is now behind a wall of fire.
Yeah, it's totally possible.
Then what?
Yeah. And so it's something that's been, it's slowly shifting, which is so great to see, but it's what's been done for decades is these paper forms. So we replace that with a system that allows the school or the daycare or the, you know, sports team to connect directly with families, so that they can share their data. They can actually connect their support network. So like I said, if in the case of my sister or my parents, I would be able to connect them to my employer or my triathlon or whoever. So if something happened to me, they could communicate with them. And then our system allows for those redundant communications so that you could actually blast out as an organization. Too often, schools is the perfect example where we will hear, you know, if there's a potential shooter on site or a lockdown evacuation situation, the worst thing that is possible is for parents to rush there. But of course they're going to. But by doing so, they're actually putting themselves in risk and potentially impacting the response of the emergency response teams that are coming there. So we're seeing a lot of schools actually step up and saying, you know, we need to make sure we've got these communications in place. Some of them are using social media, some of them are using systems like ours, but it's great to see that there is a shift.
Final break, then we'll get back to how we can complete this circle around being prepared for emergencies. We'll be right back.
Conversations That Matter is a not-for-profit program made possible thanks to the charitable support of the following and from viewers like you. Please visit conversationsthatmatter.tv and help us to continue to produce this program.
So, if as you said, you know, email is such a robust system and can kind of withstand a variety of different threats, what is there in addition to just an email that your system can provide people with?
Well, so I mean, the whole data management of making sure that we're getting rid of those paper forms that are in binders or file cabinets is huge.
Which is, well, okay, so, yeah.
So it makes sure that if it's the teacher, if it's the coach, if it's the employer, they actually can have that data right on their phone or their tablet, so it's always with them. And even if they're in a dead zone of an internet or cell service outage, they always have it with them. So what's important with that is we don't just collect contact details, we actually collect medical details as well.
So you're talking about it being on a device, but do you also store it in the cloud then?
We do, yeah. It's web-based.
Which I think is what gives you the tremendous amount of extra security, knowing that you can access it from anywhere.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's a big benefit for people that it doesn't matter where they are, that it's always there. So whether they access it on computer through the internet or they access it on their phone or their tablet, it's always there, which is great.
And that is the key, isn't it?
Yes, absolutely. Redundancy and that kind of preparedness is key for sure.
Because information becomes vitally important at that time.
Absolutely, yeah.
what are the obstacles that you face in trying to get this to be more widespread? Is it?
It's you know, people have been doing paper for so long that it's changing the mindset. So we're seeing families who are actually championing us. We've got some families who have our system works as a single record for families, and we're now seeing them connecting their single record to 4 or 5 different organizations, which is great to see sort of the connectivity across communities that's happening. But it's, I think in regards to paradigm shift, or people sort of saying, you know what, let's invest in technology, let's stop doing what we've been doing for decades and step it up. We're seeing real shifts in, particularly in the States over Canada, legislative requirements. So mandating different expectations around licensing, things like that.
So giving up the paper habit is one of the big challenges.
It is, yeah.
It seems remarkable to me that that's still a problem.
Yeah, we find that in technology, and we've gone through an accelerator program here in Vancouver, and being part of the tech industry, it's one of the weirdest things that you'll encounter is people that have been doing something as status quo forever to switch that. And then once they do, they're like, oh my goodness, this is a no-brainer.
Right.
But it's just, I think people get into a rhythm of, you know, we've always done it this way, this is just how we do our process. It's not until something goes wrong that's when they sort of step up and say, okay, this needs to change. Or they have, we have a lot of families who are championing us and saying, you know what, we don't want to fill out these pieces of paper. We want it online. We want to be able to take advantage of a system like this. So,
okay. As what you're doing gets bigger, do you have redundancy within your own system to store all of this? Because I'm thinking, well, what happens if your server gets hit?
Absolutely, yeah. So we have data stored in Vancouver and the fail-safe back up to Toronto.
So there's a vital tool for business organizations.
Absolutely.
They pay for it, but
Yeah.
you said that
Free for families,
it's
yeah.
free for families.
Yeah, we didn't want to impact any demographic from being able to use it. And because organizations are paying us to connect to their members, use their communications, and get rid of those paper forms that take forever to manage, there's a real benefit. And so we're growing, strangely, we're growing really, really quickly in the US. It's been something
What's
that's
so strange about that?
It's been slower in Canada, which, you know,
okay.
as a Canadian company, you always want us to grow faster here. But the US, they've got a different perception of risk in regards to personal risk of liability, as well as their use case does tend to be, you know, potentially an active shooter on site. So I think that's something that for them, the risk is a little bit different. Whereas here, I would say in municipalities, the risk is a child with a peanut allergy. So there's quite a varying difference of how they see the system.
How do people find you?
ePACTnetwork.com. So
like ePACT?
Yep. Yeah, we originally started as an acronym. It was the 4 stages of emergency. So emergency, prepare, act, connect, thrive is why we created the name ePACT. But then families just took it and said, no, it's an electronic pact that I'm going to support you and you're going to support me. And we were like, yeah, no, that's what we meant. So that's where ePACT came from. But ePACTnetwork.com, families can sign up for free. Organizations can reach us if they're interested in using our service, and it takes no time to get people up and running.
Well, thanks for coming up with this great idea.
Thank you.
I wish you all the
Thanks
success.
so much for having me.
My pleasure.